Marcus Blackwood had built his empire on the principle that perception was reality, and for 15 years his carefully crafted image as a successful, ethical businessman had been worth more than the billions in his accounts. At 42, he controlled a multinational corporation that touched everything from technology to real estate, and his reputation was his most valuable asset. Until the morning when everything came crashing down. The scandal broke on a Tuesday. Federal investigators had uncovered a web of tax evasion, money laundering, and offshore accounts that painted Marcus not as a legitimate businessman, but as a sophisticated criminal who had been hiding behind charitable donations and public relations campaigns. The media feeding frenzy was immediate and brutal. Every news outlet, financial publication, and social media platform carried his photograph alongside words like fraud, criminal, and investigation. Marcus sat in his corner office on the 50th floor of the Blackwood Tower, watching the protesters gather on the street below. His legal team had assured him that the charges wouldn't stick. They had been careful and the evidence was largely circumstantial, but the damage to his reputation was immediate and devastating. Stock prices plummeted, business partners distanced themselves, and social invitations disappeared overnight. His public relations team worked frantically to develop a strategy for rebuilding his image. Focus groups showed that the public saw him as a cold, calculating bachelor who cared only about profit. To counteract this perception, they recommended a complete rebranding. Marcus needed to appear more human, more relatable, more connected to ordinary people. That afternoon, as he reviewed the crisis management proposals, Marcus noticed Elena Rodriguez cleaning the conference room. She had worked for the building's cleaning service for over 3 years, and he had barely acknowledged her existence before this moment. But as he watched her methodical, careful work, an idea began to form. An idea so audacious and cynical that even his calculating mind was impressed by its cruel efficiency. Chapter 2. The Perfect Target. Elena Rodriguez had been invisible to Marcus for the 3 years she had cleaned his offices, but invisibility had given her an education that no business school could provide. At 28, she had immigrated from Guatemala with nothing but determination and the willingness to work jobs that others considered beneath them. While she cleaned, she listened to conference calls, observed negotiations, and watched how power operated in the rarefied air of high finance. What Marcus saw as the perfect target for his scheme was actually a woman of remarkable intelligence and observation skills. Elena spoke 3 languages fluently, had completed 2 years of university before financial pressures forced her to leave, and possessed a street-smart understanding of human nature that came from years of survival. She had noticed Marcus long before he noticed her, not as a potential romantic interest, but as a case study in American corporate excess. Elena's background made her perfect for Marcus's purposes. She was attractive but not threatening, foreign but not exotic, humble but not broken. She had no family in the United States who might complicate things, no social media presence that could create problems, and no apparent ambitions beyond steady work and sending money home to her family in Guatemala. Marcus began his campaign with casual conversations during late evenings when Elena cleaned his office. He praised her work ethic, asked about her background, and gradually built a rapport that felt genuine, but was entirely calculated. Elena responded politely but cautiously. She had worked for enough wealthy men to recognize when their interest in her extended beyond professional courtesy. The transformation of their relationship from employer and employee to something more personal took 3 months of careful manipulation on Marcus's part. He positioned himself as a lonely, misunderstood businessman who valued Elena's honesty and simplicity in a world full of fake people trying to use him. Elena found herself genuinely sympathetic to what she believed was his authentic struggle with isolation and public scrutiny. The proposal, when it came, was presented as a practical solution to mutual problems. Marcus needed to rehabilitate his public image, and Elena needed security and legal status, a marriage of convenience that would benefit them both. Chapter 3. The Calculated Marriage. The wedding was a masterpiece of public relations theater, designed to maximum Marcus's rehabilitation while minimizing Elena's agency in the narrative. The story crafted by his team was simple and compelling. A successful businessman who had fallen in love with the honest, hard-working woman who cleaned his offices. It was a modern Cinderella story that the media eagerly embraced as a counter-narrative to the cold criminality of the federal charges. Elena played her role perfectly during the courtship and wedding planning. She appeared appropriately grateful for Marcus's attention, suitably overwhelmed by the luxury of her new circumstances, and convincingly in love with the man who had elevated her from poverty to privilege. The media ate up every staged moment: shopping trips where Marcus helped Elena choose appropriate clothing, charity events where she appeared uncomfortable but earnest, and interviews where she spoke halting English about her gratitude for American opportunities. The prenuptial agreement was presented to Elena as a formality that would protect them both. Marcus's lawyers had crafted it to ensure that Elena would receive a modest settlement if the marriage ended, enough to seem generous to outside observers, but not enough to threaten his financial empire. Elena signed without reading it carefully, apparently trusting Marcus's assurances that it was standard procedure for wealthy marriages. The wedding itself was a media event that accomplished everything Marcus had hoped. The imagery was perfect. The powerful businessman humbled by love for a woman who represented honest American values, the immigrant success story that showed the system's fairness, and the romantic narrative that made Marcus appear human rather than corporate. Public opinion polls showed a significant improvement in his reputation within weeks of the ceremony. What Marcus didn't realize was that Elena had read the prenuptial agreement very carefully. She had also been conducting her own research into his business practices, using her access to his home office and her invisible status to gather information that would have shocked him. The woman he thought he was using had been preparing for possibilities that he hadn't even considered. Chapter 4. The Honeymoon Phase. The first 6 months of marriage unfolded exactly as Marcus had planned. Elena played the role of the grateful wife perfectly, appearing at social functions as living proof of Marcus's reformed character. She wore the clothes his stylists selected, attended the charity events his publicists arranged, and gave interviews about her husband's kindness and generosity that further humanized his public image. Marcus's legal troubles began to fade as his improved public reputation influenced public discourse about his case. Prosecutors found juries more sympathetic to a man who had married his cleaning lady out of love, and business partners who had distanced themselves began reconsidering their positions. The strategy was working flawlessly, and Marcus congratulated himself on his brilliant manipulation of both Elena and public opinion. Elena's adaptation to wealth appeared seamless to outside observers, but Marcus noticed small things that occasionally bothered him. She was too quick to understand complex financial documents left on his desk, too perceptive about the motivations of people at social events, and too comfortable navigating situations that should have been overwhelming for someone from her background. Sometimes he caught her watching him with an expression that was difficult to interpret. Not adoration, but something more analytical. Their private life was cordial but distant, exactly as Marcus preferred. Elena had her own wing of the mansion, her own schedule of charitable activities, and her own bank account, funded by a generous allowance. She made no demands on Marcus's time or attention beyond what was required for public appearances. and she seemed content with the arrangement's benefits without pushing for greater intimacy or influence. What Marcus didn't know was that Elena was using her newfound access and resources to build something much more sophisticated than he had anticipated. Her charitable work provided cover for meetings with immigration lawyers, private investigators, and financial analysts who were helping her understand the full scope of Marcus's empire and vulnerabilities. The favor she would eventually ask would be far beyond anything Marcus had imagined possible from the woman he considered his controllable, grateful puppet. Chapter 5. The First Signs of Change. The shift in Elena's behavior was so gradual that Marcus initially dismissed it as natural adaptation to her new circumstances. She began speaking with more confidence at social events, offering opinions on business and politics that demonstrated knowledge she shouldn't have possessed. When questioned about her sources of information, Elena would smile and mention documentaries she had watched or books she had been reading, explanations that seemed plausible but didn't entirely satisfy Marcus's growing unease. Elena also began requesting modifications to their arrangement that were small individually, but collectively suggested a level of strategic thinking that made Marcus uncomfortable. She wanted her own lawyer to review some documents, her own financial advisor to help manage her allowance, and her own publicist to coordinate her charitable activities. Each request was reasonable and presented as a desire to be helpful rather than independent, but Marcus recognized the gradual accumulation of resources and influence. More troubling were the moments when Elena demonstrated knowledge of Marcus's business affairs that went beyond what she should have accessed. She made casual comments about market movements that affected his investments, asked questions about business associates that revealed detailed understanding of their relationships with Marcus, and showed awareness of legal strategies being employed in his ongoing case. Marcus's attempts to investigate Elena's activities were frustrated by her careful operational security. She used encrypted communications, met with advisors in public places that made surveillance difficult, and maintained a schedule of legitimate activities that provided cover for whatever she was actually planning. His private investigators found no evidence of improper activities, but also no satisfactory explanation for her expanding capabilities and knowledge. The marriage that Marcus had designed to be completely under his control was becoming something else entirely. Elena was evolving from a puppet into a player, and he was beginning to suspect that he had seriously underestimated both her intelligence and her ambitions. Chapter 6. The investigation begins. Marcus hired the best private investigation firm in the city to conduct a comprehensive background check on Elena, something he realized he should have done before marrying her. What they discovered challenged everything he thought he knew about his wife, and raised questions about whether he had ever been in control of their relationship. Elena's educational background was more extensive than she had revealed. She had not merely completed 2 years of university, she had been an honor student, studying international business and finance before family circumstances forced her to leave Guatemala. Her work history in the United States included positions at 2 other major corporations, where she had been employed as cleaning staff, but had also served as an unofficial translator and cultural liaison for their international operations. More concerning was evidence that Elena had been systematically documenting Marcus's activities since shortly after she began working in his building. The investigators found records of her purchasing surveillance equipment, engaging legal services, and conducting research into corporate fraud investigation techniques. Rather than being a simple cleaning lady who caught Marcus's attention, she appeared to have positioned herself deliberately to observe and document his business practices. The investigation revealed that Elena had maintained contact with investigative journalists, immigration attorneys, and federal prosecutors throughout their courtship and marriage. While there was no evidence that she had provided information to Marcus's enemies, the infrastructure for such cooperation was clearly in place. Most troubling was the discovery that Elena had been building a legal and financial foundation for independence that went far beyond the allowance and protection provided by their prenuptial agreement. She had established offshore accounts, secured multiple passports, and created a support network that would allow her to disappear completely if necessary. Marcus realized that the woman he had married to rehabilitate his reputation had been conducting her own investigation into his criminal activities. The question was no longer what Elena might ask of him, but what she already knew and how she planned to use that knowledge. Chapter 7. The Favor Revealed. The confrontation came on a quiet Sunday morning when Marcus thought he would finally get answers about Elena's true agenda. He presented her with the evidence his investigators had gathered, expecting her to break down and reveal the blackmail scheme he was certain she had been developing. Instead, Elena's reaction was calm, almost amused, as if she had been waiting for this moment. Elena confirmed everything the investigators had discovered and revealed details they had missed. She had indeed been documenting Marcus's criminal activities from the moment she began working in his building. She had recordings of conversations, copies of documents, and photographic evidence of meetings that would interest federal prosecutors. But her plan was not the simple blackmail scheme Marcus had expected. The favor Elena requested was both more complex and more terrifying than anything Marcus had imagined. She wanted Marcus to voluntarily surrender to federal authorities, confess to his crimes, and cooperate fully with their investigation of the broader network of financial criminals he had worked with. In exchange for his cooperation, Elena would ensure that his confession was structured to minimize his prison sentence and preserve a portion of his assets for his family. Elena explained that she had been working with federal prosecutors for over a year to develop a case that would expose not just Marcus's individual crimes, but the systemic corruption that made such crimes possible. She had married him not for security or money, but to gain access to information that would make their case irrefutable and their investigation comprehensive. The choice Elena offered Marcus was stark: cooperate voluntarily and retain some control over his fate, or be arrested and prosecuted based on evidence that would ensure he spent the rest of his life in federal prison. She had collected enough documentation to destroy not only Marcus, but dozens of his associates, and she was prepared to use all of it unless he agreed to her terms. Marcus realized that he had not married a cleaning lady who could be manipulated and controlled. He had married a federal informant who had been manipulating him from the beginning. Chapter 8. The Web Unravels. The revelation of Elena's true identity and mission sent Marcus into a psychological spiral that his years of business success had not prepared him for. Every memory of their relationship had to be re-examined through the lens of calculated deception. Every intimate moment, every gesture of affection, every expression of gratitude had been performance designed to maintain her cover while she gathered evidence for his destruction. Elena explained the scope of her operation with the patience of a teacher educating a slow student. She had been recruited by federal prosecutors specifically to investigate Marcus after a whistleblower from his company had provided initial evidence of financial crimes. Her background in business and finance, combined with her language skills and ability to work invisibly in corporate environments, made her perfect for the undercover assignment. The cleaning job had been arranged through a company that was cooperating with federal investigators. Elena's access to Marcus's offices, combined with surveillance equipment and legal wiretaps, had allowed prosecutors to build a case that went far beyond the initial charges. They now had evidence of money laundering, tax evasion, bribery, and racketeering that involved dozens of individuals and multiple international criminal organizations. Marcus's marriage to Elena had actually accelerated the investigation rather than protecting him from it. His decision to bring her into his home and social circle had given her access to information and evidence that would have taken years to gather through traditional investigation methods. The romantic story that was rehabilitating his public reputation was actually documenting his criminal activities in unprecedented detail. Elena also revealed that several of Marcus's business associates and social contacts were already cooperating with federal authorities. The network of criminals he thought he could trust had been systematically compromised, and he was the primary remaining target of an investigation that was ready to conclude with or without his cooperation. The marriage that Marcus had designed as his salvation had become the mechanism of his complete destruction. Chapter 9. The Choice. Marcus spent 3 days in his study, going through documents and records while trying to understand the full extent of Elena's deception and his own legal exposure. The evidence she possessed was comprehensive and damning, but the choice she offered was genuinely designed to minimize his prison sentence in exchange for his cooperation. She wasn't simply destroying him for revenge. She was offering him the best possible outcome under circumstances that had been inevitable since the investigation began. Elena gave Marcus space to process the situation while maintaining the public facade of their marriage. She continued attending social events, fulfilling charitable commitments, and playing the role of the supportive wife, while Marcus decided whether to accept her terms or force prosecutors to proceed with the evidence they already possessed. During this period, Marcus began to understand the sophistication of the operation Elena had conducted. She had not simply gathered information randomly. She had systematically targeted the most vulnerable aspects of his criminal enterprise, documented the most serious crimes, and identified the evidence that would be most compelling to juries. Her work was not the product of luck or accident, but of professional-level investigation skills and strategic thinking. Marcus also realized that Elena had genuinely tried to minimize the collateral damage of the investigation. She had structured her evidence gathering to focus on Marcus and his closest criminal associates while protecting employees and business partners who were not involved in illegal activities. She had even ensured that some of Marcus's legitimate business ventures would survive his downfall, preserving jobs and value for innocent stakeholders. The choice Elena offered was not just about legal strategy. It was about whether Marcus would take responsibility for his actions and help clean up the corruption he had contributed to, or whether he would continue to prioritize his own interests over justice and accountability. The decision he made would determine not only his own fate, but the fate of everyone who had been harmed by the criminal enterprise he had built. Chapter 10. The Decision. Marcus's decision came not from calculation or strategy, but from a moment of clarity about the man he had become and the legacy he would leave. Faced with irrefutable evidence of his crimes and the certainty of prosecution regardless of his choice, he chose to cooperate with federal authorities and accept responsibility for the harm his actions had caused. The confession process was emotionally devastating for Marcus, requiring him to acknowledge not only the specific crimes he had committed, but the broader impact of his actions on investors, employees, and communities who had trusted his companies. Elena participated in some of these sessions, helping prosecutors understand the technical details of financial transactions and providing context for the evidence she had gathered. Marcus discovered that Elena's investigation had uncovered crimes he had forgotten about and connections to criminal organizations he hadn't realized were problematic. Her systematic documentation of his activities revealed patterns of behavior that even he hadn't fully recognized, showing how his pursuit of profit and power had gradually corrupted every aspect of his business operations. The cooperation agreement Elena had negotiated for Marcus was better than anything his own lawyers could have achieved. Her year of preparation had allowed prosecutors to structure a plea deal that acknowledged his full cooperation while providing him with the minimum possible sentence given the severity of his crimes. Without her intervention, he would have faced life in prison. With her help, he would serve 8 to 12 years in federal prison. Elena also revealed that she had been protecting Marcus's family throughout the investigation, ensuring that his ex-wife and children would not be prosecuted for crimes they had not committed, and that they would retain enough assets to maintain their financial security. Her work had been designed not just to achieve justice, but to minimize harm to innocent people who would be affected by Marcus's downfall. The woman Marcus had married for appearances had saved his life while destroying his criminal empire. Chapter 11. The aftermath. The public revelation of Elena's true identity and the scope of the federal investigation created a media sensation that exceeded even the original scandal of Marcus's indictment. The story of the undercover federal agent who had married her target to gather evidence captured public imagination and dominated news cycles for weeks. Elena's background and motivations were examined in detail, revealing a woman whose personal history with economic injustice had motivated her to pursue a career in law enforcement focused on financial crimes. Her family in Guatemala had been victims of corrupt business practices similar to Marcus's crimes, and her work as an undercover investigator was driven by a genuine commitment to preventing the harm such crimes caused to vulnerable communities. Marcus's cooperation with federal authorities led to the indictment of 47 individuals and the dissolution of a criminal network that had operated for over 2 decades. The investigation revealed billions of dollars in fraudulent activities and resulted in the recovery of hundreds of millions in assets that were returned to victims and investors who had been defrauded. Elena's testimony in the subsequent trials was precise and devastating, providing evidence that had been impossible to gather through traditional investigation methods. Her recordings of conversations, photographs of documents, and detailed observations of criminal activities provided prosecutors with an unprecedented view into how sophisticated financial crimes were planned and executed. The marriage between Marcus and Elena was annulled as part of his plea agreement, but their relationship continued in the form of periodic consultations as prosecutors prepared for trials of other defendants. Elena had accomplished her mission completely, but the personal cost of living undercover for over a year had been significant, requiring her to seek psychological counseling to process the complex emotions of her extended deception. Marcus began serving his sentence with the knowledge that Elena had not only destroyed his criminal empire, but had probably saved his life by preventing him from continuing down a path that would have led to much worse consequences. Chapter 12. The Reckoning. Elena's work on the Marcus Blackwood case established her reputation as one of the most effective undercover investigators in federal law enforcement, but it also marked the end of her career in undercover operations. The psychological toll of maintaining false identities and manipulating targets for extended periods had become too great, and she requested transfer to other investigative work that didn't require the same level of personal deception. Marcus adapted to federal prison better than expected, using his business skills to help other inmates with legal correspondence and financial planning while serving his sentence. He maintained correspondence with Elena through official channels, writing letters that were part apology, part gratitude, and part attempt to understand how someone he had completely underestimated had so thoroughly outmaneuvered him. Elena used her experience from the Marcus Blackwood investigation to develop training programs for other undercover agents, helping them understand the psychological challenges of extended deception and the ethical complexities of manipulating targets to achieve legitimate law enforcement goals. Her work contributed to policy changes that better protected both agents and targets in undercover operations. The criminal network that Marcus had been part of was systematically dismantled over the following 3 years, with Elena's evidence serving as the foundation for prosecutions that reached into multiple countries and industries. The investigation became a model for international cooperation in financial crime enforcement and led to policy changes that made similar criminal enterprises more difficult to operate. Marcus's family gradually rebuilt their lives with the assets Elena had helped them preserve, while Marcus himself used his prison time to pursue education in ethics and sociology, trying to understand how he had rationalized behaviors that had caused so much harm. His correspondence with Elena evolved into a complex dialogue about justice, redemption, and the possibility of atonement for serious crimes. Elena's marriage to Marcus had been entirely false, but the relationship that emerged from its aftermath was perhaps more honest than any Marcus had ever experienced. Chapter 13. The Final Truth. 5 years after Marcus began serving his sentence, Elena visited him in federal prison for what would be their final conversation. The woman who had once cleaned his offices and later destroyed his criminal empire had evolved into a senior federal investigator whose work on financial crimes had influenced policy at national and international levels. Marcus had used his prison time to complete degrees in psychology and social work, planning to spend his remaining years after release working with communities that had been harmed by financial crimes similar to his own. The transformation was genuine rather than strategic, motivated by his gradual understanding of the human cost of his actions rather than by hopes for early release or public rehabilitation. Elena explained that her original mission had been not just to gather evidence against Marcus, but to understand how intelligent, educated people rationalized participating in criminal enterprises that harmed innocent people. Her investigation had revealed that Marcus was not uniquely evil, but rather representative of a system that rewarded short-term profit over long-term social responsibility. The conversation between them was no longer about the crimes Marcus had committed or the deception Elena had employed, but about the broader questions of justice, accountability, and redemption that their case had raised. Elena had achieved her professional goals completely, but she acknowledged that the personal cost of extended deception had changed her in ways she was still processing. Marcus expressed genuine gratitude for Elena's intervention, recognizing that her investigation had not only stopped his criminal activities, but had forced him to confront the person he had become and choose a different path forward. Without her work, he would have continued his criminal activities until they led to consequences far worse than federal prison. Their final conversation confirmed what both had come to understand. Elena had not destroyed Marcus's life by exposing his crimes. She had saved him from destroying himself and countless others through continued criminal behavior. The favor she had asked had been not just for justice, but for the possibility of redemption for everyone involved. The marriage that had begun as manipulation had become an unlikely catalyst for transformation that extended far beyond either of their individual lives. Thank you for joining us for this complex tale of deception, justice, and unexpected redemption. This story reminds us that appearances can be profoundly deceiving, and that people we might dismiss or underestimate often possess depths of intelligence, capability, and moral purpose that can reshape entire situations. Elena and Marcus's story shows us that even relationships built on manipulation and false pretenses can sometimes lead to genuine transformation and justice. We'd love to hear from our listeners around the world. Please let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from as you listen to these stories that explore the complex realities of human nature, power, and the possibility of change.